Welcome all to the Future Business Forum. I'm Tristan Allen, sitting with Brian Wright and Rachel Dempers, and we meet regularly to have a chat about how we see the world of business, how it's developing, the anxieties that may sit around business at the moment, the uncertainties about the future. And we thought, rather than just wish on to each other, we'd record this and put it into the blogosphere and see how, if anybody else wants to hear it as well. So this is the first of many, hopefully. I'm going to let Rachel introduce herself first, because it's obviously a lady, and we'll take it from there.
Thanks, Tristan. So hello, I'm Rachel Dempers, as Tristan said. I've run my own company focusing around executive coaching and future of work. My background was a global leader and a EMEA leader for HR at Dell Technologies, very forward-thinking company, great experience. Personal situation changed circumstances, so I decided to set up my own company and help SMEs really understand the future of work. So that's my background. Brian?
My name is Brian Wright. I'm one of the directors of a business called Yellow Yo-Yo. We are a business that looks after and helps improve or accelerate companies' brands, and we look at futures, we look at design, we look at marketing, and generally we help people develop a 360 look at their brand, both internally and externally, to make it irresistible to their customers. And my interest in this current situation is how a lot of the things that the three of us have been talking about have come to bear on how the pandemic has developed, and some things have mitigated it, some things have made it worse. So it's a good time to be talking about this.
And I'm Tristan Allen, founder and director of Room 44, an innovation strategy agency based in Milton Keynes in the UK. We help clients use design thinking to create product strategies, and our strapline is future thinking, future proofing, which is probably a good segue into this subject. So we've got 3 items to discuss today, which are linked and contingent. The first one being the current business of business in our experience, so from talking to our clients. The second one is how we see things developing over the next year, a little bit of future gazing. And the last one is what people can do to work through the uncertainty that they're being presented with today. So I'm going to kick it into I'm just going to throw it onto the table, and we're going to chat around this. We'll try not to speak over each other. There are no ground rules, except we'll try not to swear either. I can't promise to adhere to that one. And we'll take about half an hour of your time. So how do we think people are coping with the COVID-19 era, such as it is so far? Rachel.
Well, go on, Rachel.
So having read around a lot and talked to people, there definitely is the cycle of grief and people having to get their heads around, I think, losing what they did know. And that could be on a personal level, on a business level, and knowing that things are going to change or have changed, and there's this constant churn that people are having to work through, and there is no known fact of what the future looks like. And from a future of work perspective, that's definitely been accelerated. So what we would have talked about 4 months ago happening in a couple of years' time or 3 years' time, if you look at the technology piece, that's happening now. And so people are really having to get their heads around what those changes mean to them on a personal level and the society level and a business level.
Brian.
I think the thing that's amazed me really generally is when all this happened. I mean, the three of us have been talking about the future of work and so on for a while, future of business, and a lot of the things that we've been talking about have played a part in the story since it became apparent how serious the situation was. And if you've looked at the cycle of effects, when it became obvious that there was a pandemic. It was going to come to the Great Britain, because that's where we live. You know, a lot of people were frightened viscerally for their, and it was a sort of an inward feel. So you were frightened not as much for yourself, but for your family and your friends. And there was a sort of a bring your arms in and keep everybody safe type thing. And that, the result of that was things like, you know, people rushing to the supermarkets and hoarding and you know, just doing generally behaviours which are out of the norm. But since then, what's really amazed me and is quite heartening is the empathy that you've seen amongst people, which is the heart of any sort of strong society, and the resilience. People are obviously anxious. Some are more anxious than others, particularly if they've lost their job, particularly if they've been furloughed and somebody else hasn't at work. Money for a lot of people is a real issue. Where we live, where we all sort of work, sort of Buckinghamshire, lots and lots of businesses have gone out of business. We don't know the score yet. We don't know how big that issue is. But generally, I've been amazed at how people have developed this empathy and developed this resilience and genuinely care about everybody else. And you know, quite how long, and hopefully that will last. And I think one of the things that technology has allowed us to do, one of the sort of driving these mega trends in technology, is that it's allowed the government to actually work so quickly to get some support out there to make us all feel a little bit safer. Now that wouldn't have happened, you know, 20 years ago, 10 years ago. We wouldn't have had the sort of technology that allows them to do what they've done financially, do what they've done with communications. So, yeah, I think although the situation's, you know, scary and frightening, and you know, and it still is, it won't change until we get the virus, some sort of antidote to it all. The good that's come out of it, I think, is equally amazing.
I think I agree. I think after the first wave of shock, to go back to the analogy that Rachel made about this being sort of similar to the 5 stages of grief, the shock we felt at the unusualness of it, the unprecedented nature of the lockdown, was obviously very, very startling in its effect on people and on business. And then I perceive, not only from, you know, where I live, which is a fairly small community, but from talking to people as well, that some things have been for the better. You know, there's been a huge sigh of relief not to hear traffic on the roads and better, and older people are looking at the sky and going, I can see things I couldn't see for a while. Not seeing aeroplanes, which is, you know, it's been interesting to see that. You've been able to hear birds, and that's not the same for everybody, of course, because not everybody's lucky enough to live in the country or wants to. Then you've got the people that have adapted very quickly. You know, Zoom. Was it Rachel? Did you tell me this, or did I read it somewhere that back in December, Zoom had 10 million users, and in March they had 300 million users. Now, as a scalability example, that's extraordinary. Mm. And I've got a client that saw a 10 times uplift in her orders overnight almost, and coped with it without increasing her staff at all. But obviously, didn't have to lay anybody off either. On the flip side of that, there are people who have been furloughed and who have had to take time out, willingly or otherwise, and they're taking time to take stock. They've got a little bit of time to breathe. The money's a problem, obviously, but they've got time on their hands with which they can plan their future a bit better. I think there's been a bit of a settling on the idea that maybe Generation Z had it right to some regards. The older generations aren't very comfortable with the gig economy because there's uncertainty attached to that and no pensions perhaps. But the gig economy gives people the flexibility to change direction very quickly and do a number of different things. And people who are now out of work or looking around and waiting for work to restart, they can do some of those things or plan to do some of those things in the same way that Gen Z always has. So in terms of, you know, it's been a great learning experience for lots of people as well. And I know that sounds a bit complacent because there's a lot of worry and concern around in some people's minds, lots of people's minds. But there is some good to come out of this. And I think one of the sentiments that I've heard most frequently is that lots of people just don't want it to return to the way it was. They don't want traffic to go back to the levels that we saw before. We don't want to be under the same stress. We've enjoyed having the time with the family. I think that's going to be a real change, a game changer as we move forward. How it pans out, we haven't quite got to yet, but certainly the other side of the concern, I think. Do you agree, Rachel?
Yes, I think there's lots of good that will come out of this, but I think there's a lot of uncertainty as well. So if people are furloughed, yes, it can give them opportunity to think about, actually, was the the path they were on good for them, or is it what they wanted to do? But it could also be a huge amount of anxiety, which is, why did I get furloughed and why did Bob not? And how am I going to be brought back into the company? Am I going to be brought back into the company, or is this just the first step towards redundancy? So I think there's two sides to the story as well. And for leaders looking to bring their teams back together, they're going to have to think very carefully about how they communicate with the staff who are on furlough and those who are not, because there could be anxiety that I didn't get furloughed and I'm a single mum at home trying to homeschool my kids, but I'm still having to work full time, whereas my colleague managed to have time with their family and do all the things they wanted to do, and they didn't have to work. Because I think as leaders, whilst there's uncertainty about the business, it's also about how we bring the teams that they had before back together. And it may be teams doing different things. And also I was talking to a leader last week who was saying, actually, I furloughed half of my team and I don't need them back because I found new ways of working. So there's lots of uncertainty everywhere. So I think whilst people who have the opportunity to rethink about what they want to do with their future because they're on furlough, then that's fantastic. But I think also leaders and companies need to get their head around how do they manage that difficult balance of bringing people back in to motivate them potentially to do something different moving forward because they found new ways of working.
Yeah, I think there are some big questions about starting up again. I want to come to one really big one I read about yesterday that is interesting in a second. But carrying on with what Rachel was just saying, I think you were mentioning, Tristan, that a lot of people have had time to think about where they want to be. I don't think of all the clients that we've talked to during this period, I think every one of them has said one of the things that they've really valued is the time they've had to think about where they want their businesses to be or where they want to personally be. At least two of them have firmed up on what they want to do really long term. So not just their business is what they want to do later, and because they've never really had the time to think about that. So that it's interesting when you're given the time, how you use it, and I think because it's there's a bit of anxiety around, there's a bit of people are a bit scared. You tend to think about, okay, is this really what I want? Is what I'm doing now? And those are for people who've got that space in their head to be able to think that way. If you're really scared, like Rachel was talking about people who may not go back to work or have already lost their business, all of that, then it's actually a fundamental thing of what the hell do I do now? We've got a situation where the unemployment in this country is shot up, and I don't know what the numbers are. Rachel, you might have a sort of clue as to where it might be, but when you're in that situation, you're suddenly furloughed and might not get a job back, or you've lost your business. That adds a huge extra weight on to what happens next on top of the fear. I think that's one thing. But the other thing I wanted to say, and you were talking about it's great when you see no planes in the sky, and the canals in Venice are clear now, and all that sort of stuff. One of the things I was reading yesterday, another big question that maybe we can sort of deal another time with in more detail, is this: when we do we restart thinking about things like climate change, or do we just put the economy first? Because if we restart just thinking about the economy, then it might not be in the way that's right for what we was supposed to be the Green Deal that we were coming up with. And that I think that argument's probably starting to come to fever pitch now in the restart. How do you do it? What are the principles of the restart? We've got it inadvertently. We've got this proof that we were damaging climate, and because everything's so much nicer without the traffic, without the pollution. So that I think is an interesting big question when we do come out of this.
And Seth Godin, in one of his very regular missives, said, I don't know what we're all worried about. I'm paraphrasing really badly, but he said, tomorrow was always going to be different. Tomorrow always is, and it's never the same as yesterday, really. Things always change, and when it's done, it's done. And then you look at the very famous quote from Steve Jobs, and again I'm going to paraphrase, I can't remember it exactly, but he said, and we quote this a lot in innovation strategy workshops, that you can't join the dots by looking forward. You've got to look back, and in order to do that for the future, you've got to take a leap and know what you want to be, or know where you want to go.